welcome back to the Nerd Variety Podcast. I'm Hannah, and I am joined by Hunter.
Yes.
And Josh.
What's up?
As per usual. This week we're going to be talking about classics, because honestly, I'm sick and tired of trying to explain why I haven't seen this movie or haven't heard of that movie. So we're going to talk about what are the classics, and maybe try and come up with some sort of list to determine what those are. When I say classics, I'm not talking about, like, we talked about, like, the Turner Classic Movies. Not talking about that. Mostly looking for modern classics that you could argue hold, like, critical pop culture references or are the must-sees of the generation. So, I just want to start by opening up the floor. What do you guys think makes a classic in the modern sense?
Well,
So no Greek classics, right?
Greek classics?
It depends.
Well,
so like
I don't think so.
The Clash of the
Okay.
Titans was remade, somewhat recently. It's a few years now, but still, yeah. I don't think
that was a joke though. But yeah.
yeah, I don't think
Classical
that's
music.
a must see or but yeah.
Yeah.
No, those are jokes.
So you guys have some idea of what I think makes it something a classic, right? I think I feel like it needs to be something that you have to have seen in order to get, I would say, sort of prominent pop culture references, or maybe even something of like historical value. So I know I've talked about Star Trek, the original series, as being like, come on, like, if you're going to call yourself a sci-fi nerd, especially, like, you should have seen at least most of Star Trek, the original series, because of where it was in history in terms of media and sci-fi.
But the question is, how many original Star Trek episodes were there?
I don't know, but I know that there were 3 seasons.
And when did they air?
Neither
when
of
did
you
they
know
air,
what
Hannah?
I'm referencing, and
I don't know when they aired. I had them all on VHS tape.
You guys do not watch South Park, so you do not get my reference.
Yeah,
Can
but
you
I would
explain
argue
your
I don't
reference,
have
sir?
to watch South Park.
I would argue that it's a classic
Why would you say that?
Whoa.
because since its debut, and
Mhm.
even to today, it has kept up with the times and has been very I don't know, it's been very, what's the word I'm looking for?
So far, I'm not convinced.
Yeah, no. It's been very up to date on everything, and it's been very relevant. It's been able to stay relevant, and a lot of its jokes and everything are pretty timeless. I'd have to say a lot of it is. In terms of cartoon shows, I would definitely consider South Park a classic, especially for what I think is one of the shows, not the show necessarily, but one of the shows that really helped push for the modern cartoons that are aimed towards adults. Because it used to be more cartoons were like for kids, and they were, they didn't really have a lot of adult humor. I definitely think South Park helped grow the audience into a more mature cartoon audience.
I'm about to say something that I haven't actually considered before, but I think my opinion would be that something has to be off the air for it to be considered a classic.
Off the air.
I don't know.
So
because I was honestly earlier today I was thinking also about The Simpsons. Would you not consider that a classic because it's still on the air?
it's been on the air for over 30 since it premiered in 1990.
I think it was in
or
the
80s. Yeah, late 80s. So it's captured a lot of pop culture and still being aired. And I think it was an inspiration for a lot of shows like South Park and Family Guy. So
Yeah.
it kind of is, it itself is an animation, is a classic animated series. So it kind of, because it ties in so much history.
Yeah. And again, that's my point too. And that's also why I would consider South Park although I feel like Well, South Park's been around almost as long as The Simpsons.
What year did it air?
I'm looking it up.
I want to say 94.
97.
97? Oh, okay. Damn.
Okay.
So
Still
The Simpsons has 8 years on it?
Yeah, again, like, and depending on where you're considering modern and modern classics, that's pretty close.
I don't know. I still feel like South Park has more of a niche audience.
Right. Things like The Simpsons are a little more because kids can appreciate the show, but also I think kids can appreciate the show, but also adults can really appreciate the show as well. As you grow up watching it, you can be like, oh, I caught that stuff now. If you go back and watch older episodes,
And I feel like when I talk about making references in pop culture, there's certain shows and movies where like the references have become part of our language, and like even people who haven't seen the show will quote it, right?
Well, I mean, I think that I feel like
I don't know if South Park falls into that category.
I mean, I feel like it does, but maybe that's just my experiences. Because, I mean, I don't really feel, again, like we're talking about The Simpsons, I would consider that a classic. I don't really hear or see that referenced very much, honestly. I hear and see South Park referenced more.
The dynamic and I guess how it kind of looks at culture and historical events as they pass on and puts their own little take on them, that has made it a classic. And
you're talking about South Park?
The shows, no, The Simpsons, and how the shows like South Park, to a degree, and mostly Family Guy and other, kind of adult animated shows have gone, and also shows that are for kids, but have also kind of, tried to emulate that as well.
See, you keep talking about apparently The Simpsons. All these points seem just as relevant to South Park. Like,
I just
like
don't
literally,
think
I keep thinking that you're talking
to
about
be a classic yet.
It's 22.
Yeah,
it's over the legal drinking age in the United States.
But it can't rent a car.
Well, and I might argue that like
I think it can. I think
it should be 25.
I think it's 21.
Anyway, not the point. Not the point. I think maybe someday it could be a classic. But I feel like the idea of like animation for adults is still relatively new, and I feel like a lot of it comes from anime being so popular in Japan. It's kind of people are starting to watch animation at all ages, but I feel like it's still kind of a blossoming medium, and I feel like maybe when it gets into full swing, people will look back and say South Park's a classic.
Again, I still think it is, because it's just had such an impact on media in general. And like even the movie was fantastic, and I think that was a big point as well, just in the industry for animation.
Well, and I also want to make the distinction, because I do think it should be made, that even though I feel like there are a group of movies or TV shows out there that like kind of everyone, or at least 90% of people would agree are classics, but those might not necessarily be the same ones that are classic for you. So it sounds like South Park's had a big effect on you, but I don't know how much of effect I've seen it have on just culture in general.
That'll be a good idea for a poll.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Yeah. We are putting a poll
but
tomorrow.
Yeah. But as far as classics though, Hannah, you suggested that for something to be a classic, it has to be off the air. I also want to argue, that as a classic, it has to have influenced other recent shows and movies. So, like you see in a lot of TV shows, they have episode titles that are kind of referencing an older movie or older TV series, or another catchphrase from an older movie, TV series, or even a book.
Just the fact that I feel like Hunter keeps
along with themes.
Yeah, I think the fact that Hunter keeps getting The Simpsons and South Park confused when we're talking about them and we talked about how South Park is influenced by The Simpsons, would lead me to
I don't
make the
really
decision
know-
that, like,
I don't really know that it was all that much, though. I don't really know
it
that South Park.
feels like The Simpsons was a precursor.
I would say that about The Simpsons in relation to other shows. I wouldn't know that I don't know that I would really say it about South Park.
Mm.
Yeah.
Just because
Another-
it's a lot more, when it started out too, it was a lot more crass, vulgar than The Simpsons. So it took
Sure.
steps and
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
different. Okay, but also, Hannah, I just want to say, if you're saying it has to be off the air to be considered classics,
I'm not saying that. I just think
that's what you said. But I just want to say, if that is going to be your case, that means you can't include Doctor Who as a classic.
I could include classic Doctor Who.
But this is still a
Same as I could include Star Trek the
This is-
original series instead of Star Trek Discovery.
Current Doctor Who is still a continuation. There was a break. It wasn't off the air for good.
Well,
because
I
you pick up
actually
with the ninth Doctor, who takes place after the Doctor that was in the movie, who takes place after the Doctor that was last in classic.
I actually wouldn't. I don't know if I would say Doctor Who's a classic anyway.
Well, then you're crazy.
It is one of the top TV shows.
It is
For
and
sure.
It has bin like one of the, if you're talking about a genre, which
Mhm.
Doctor Who is what, sci-fi? Is it
Yeah,
sci-fi
yeah.
or is it
Yes.
fantasy? Or is it just sci-fi?
It's definitely sci-fi.
Sci-fi. Okay, so it fits in the sci-fi thing. So that's one of the shows that a lot of other shows base their plots and their, some of their, characters off of.
Hmm.
I think another rule for a classic, you can appreciate them. Some can only be appreciated as an adult. So, like, I'm looking at classics. Let's look at what was it? Terminator movies. You can't really appreciate them I couldn't really appreciate them as a kid because
Hmm.
somehow I was able to watch Terminator 2 when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, of course.
But now watching it now, I can really appreciate it because I can kind of understand the adult situations that were going on,
Mhm.
and now I can appreciate it for like, oh wow, they really did a lot of great work setting this up, and the action scenes, and making something that is still some people try to copy into the modern day. And another rule I want to suggest is that classics can be flawed.
You should have
sure.
really, when we asked before we started this, you should have clarified the rules instead of after we started talking.
I thought we were going to discuss the rules.
Yeah, I think the rules are part of the discussion.
Okay.
The rules.
What I
Discuss the
really want
rules.
to know is, Josh, are you taking notes?
I have ideas that I wrote down.
Okay, all right. You just keep showing a pen, and I'm like, is he taking notes? I'm not taking notes. I feel
This is not a
bad.
discussion. This is not a discussion.
I'm
I'm sorry.
I'll have a test afterwards, Hannah.
Oh, good. Definitely one thing I do think is a classic cartoon, I would say, is Scooby-Doo.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I feel like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know when Scooby-Doo first came out, but I feel like the past several generations have all had their own iteration of it. And I would say it's definitely
Is that not
integrated pretty well into our culture. Do what?
Is that not still on the air? Because I know they
It is,
kept
but
on-
it's like, it's like a reboot.
yeah.
It's like the fourth time it's been rebooted or something
Yeah.
like that. So,
Yeah.
and I think that
The,
just kind of proves my point, honestly.
yeah, the Shaggy that was in the live action movie is now voicing Shaggy.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
I haven't watched.
Yeah, apparently Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? First
Mhm.
came out in 1969.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's been around a while,
Yeah.
and just kind of hasn't stopped since then.
Yeah.
I mean, it has.
Just for like a couple years at a time, though. We've had reboots of the animated series, animated movies, live action movies. Like, it just doesn't die, and I'm not
Yeah.
complaining.
Yeah. Like Transformers started in the 80s, and it's still going on even after the movies, the live action
Somehow.
movies. But it also had, it has a lot of other spin-off shows, and has had a really good animated movie in the late 80s or something like that. So it's definitely if you're looking at animation, that's classic.
Yeah. I would say so.
I there's another one. Toy Story would be the example, because that's now a classic because it kind of shepherded all the Pixar computer animated movies.
Yeah, it definitely has a special place in history.
I was actually definitely thinking of that as one that I was going to bring up. If someone else didn't, which
yeah.
So it seems like having an impact on history in terms of like the media seems like something that we are mostly agreeing on as something that has to be there for a classic.
Yeah.
Even if you guys apparently are not aware of its impact.
Well, it's hard to say that South Park has impacted history.
It is not hard.
Still in process.
It is not hard to say that. It has definitely impacted history. Look it up. Look up anything about it.
That was your homework, was to look it up and bring it in.
I never did homework even when I was in school. But okay, so I mean, of course I did. No, I didn't. There's no point in lying about it now.
Well, Hunter, I will agree with you on another classic. I can't lift my shirt up so you guys can see it. If y'all can't see my shirt.
Okay without you doing that.
Can you see my shirt?
First of all, I can't see.
It's kind of blurry.
It says
red.
It says Star Wars on it.
Okay, yeah. I kind of thought it might.
Star Wars.
Definitely a classic.
I got your back on that one.
I would agree.
But it's on your phone.
I think the fact that most sci-fi nerds, separate themselves into the Star Wars or the Star Trek category, kind of implies that those are two pretty big things that are going on. And I've never really understood why people are so adamant about one being better than the other.
Yeah, I mean, because clearly Star Wars is the better, but so it's not even a debate.
Oh gosh, I shouldn't have said anything.
How to debate Star Wars for Star Trek, because
I don't think that needs to be today's podcast. I think maybe that should be a different one.
Time, Hannah.
Maybe next time.
For you, I ain't using mine on that.
Both are good. Both are classics.
I would agree with that too.
Okay.
But Star Wars is better. Anyway,
how would you argue, Hannah, Star Trek being a classic?
Well, Star Trek was like one of the first sci-fi things, and they did a lot of revolutionary stuff with like their animation and stuff. Not to mention they had one of my favorite things about it is the fact that like even back in the day they had so many varied races represented on board their ship. So this is back in the 60s where race is like a really big thing, right? But they're like they have this mindset of in the future, we have black people and Russian people and aliens and all these people just working together. So that was really cool. They had the first mixed race kiss in television ever, which I think is really cool. And it was just really progressive for its time. Mm-hmm. And was sort of like the beginning of, there's like this whole history of it with like, it actually was mostly popular with women, and they basically like started the very early Star Trek cons in their living rooms and stuff like that. So There's just a lot of history.
Star Trek. Did you assume it was the first sci-fi show?
I don't think it was the first, but it was definitely a very popular one early on.
Yeah, you know what came before it?
Doctor Who.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, not surprised.
3 years before.
Not much before.
Still enough, apparently. If 8 years is enough, 3 years is definitely enough of a difference.
We could say that Star Trek is an American classic and Doctor Who's a British classic.
No.
Yes, you can, because they both. That's what they are.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, Hunter.
I'm not actually debating that. I'm not saying one is a classic and one's not. I'm just saying she said like Star Trek is the first sci-fi thing, and I'm saying, well, Doctor Who was.
Okay, it wasn't first. It was very early on.
It was one of the first.
I don't know for sure because I didn't just look it up right now, which I should have. I don't know when the Twilight Zone first aired, but
that's a good point.
Yeah, definitely, because it was in black and white, so it'd be definitely
Well, it wasn't necessarily made in black and white. Like it doesn't because it was in black and white doesn't mean they couldn't have done it in.
Wow. Yeah, Twilight Zone, 1959.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, I think, along the cusp when color TV was about to, start up. But most of so a lot of times when you see a thumbnail on YouTube of like, oh, the Twilight Zone, or when you see a thumbnail on Hulu or somewhere where you're watching Twilight Zone, it's black and white.
Yeah.
But it still carries a lot of weight, and they have a lot of really good episodes, and just that really kind of make you think or creep you out.
And they just recently started remaking it.
Yeah,
rebooting it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any of that. It's like Joseph Gordon-Levitt
doing
it, I guess.
No, it's
isn't it? I'm pretty sure it is.
Jordan Peele.
No.
Yeah, it was it was announced in the Super Bowl this year.
Well, maybe he's doing it too, but I'm pretty sure Joseph Gordon-Levitt. No, maybe not.
Yeah, I think he might be acting in it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, another classic. If we're talking still about animation, one that I definitely wanted to bring up was Batman the Animated Series.
Yes.
And again, that may very well still be a thing that it's maybe more of a niche audience like South Park, apparently. Because apparently South Park is niche too.
I think we can argue that it was one of the first. It wasn't the first, because we had Super Friends and other
like Spider-Man,
other animated comic shows.
Although speaking of
also
which,
other
Spider-Man, I would consider also a classic. But,
well,
but
we
it
also
also
have
had
other Batman material.
Yeah,
but this one kind of ushered in that dark noir tone that that said, hey, it's okay for these to be marketed toward adults, like what you were saying, Hannah, about a lot of animation not being like, oh, this is a kid show, it's animated, it's a show. No, not necessarily, because
and I feel like in recent years there's been stigma about like, you watch anime but you're an adult. It's like that's okay.
Yeah.
I feel like we're still trying to get over that.
Some stories you just can't tell with live action. You can tell with animation though.
Yeah, I do want to know why you say Batman the animated series, like, specifically, because I would definitely argue Batman needs to be on there, but I think back to the earliest movies.
Well,
where,
again,
they climb up a building and they turn the camera sideways, so it looks like they're climbing up a building, but they're just walking on the floor.
Yeah, but as I said, I was being more specific to animation.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, definitely Batman, TV series, I would also say is definitely a classic show.
So why do you say Batman the Animated Series is classic?
Just because I think it really, I feel, set in the modern wave of DC's big animated universe that I think if it weren't for that, they wouldn't have as much success in that area right now. And everybody, maybe not everybody, fans know that Mark Hamill is the best Joker and that Kevin Conroy is the best Batman.
Because they are.
Yes, exactly. But you ask anybody who hasn't seen it, they'd be just
I have not seen it, but I know the internet agrees with you, because I see stuff about Mark Hamill's Joker all the time.
It is fantastic.
And I want to see it. I haven't gotten around to it, but
yeah. And again, they just I think Batman would still be popular. I don't know if he would be. It's really tough to say because it exists. I don't know if he would be as popular today if it weren't for the animated series. Again, I think he'd still be really popular, maybe just not as popular in the same way. Because again, there were still plenty of movies before that. There was the Keaton ones. I'm blanking on everything.
I know I am too. I was wanting to bail you out. I can't.
Yeah,
you're right, Hunter. The 89 was the first Batman with Keaton. 92 was the second one, which is also when the animated series aired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
But I think the movies helped kind of push that tone too. Say, hey, you can. There's a market for that dark tone that people love to see in the movies, and it's in the comics. So just make an animated show so you can tell more stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. On a lighter note,
that wasn't exactly
a
dark note, except for Batman. So I guess you could consider it that.
Yeah. Well, we're not looking at like dark shows, but looking at like, I guess what's a lighter anime. We said a lighter animated series was like Scooby Doo.
See, honestly,
had a lot of
that doesn't feel light to me. Like it does, but I also remember feeling like as a kid when I watched it, it felt very dark to me. You know, like it's about murder and stuff.
But it's Scooby Doo. What Scooby Doo are you watching?
I don't know. I don't. It was
they were all in mask.
Yeah, it was dark and gritty, and there were criminals doing stuff hiding around. It was like really look at that show.
Yeah, look at that shit, dude. That show's hardcore, man.
It's kind of like, okay, not to the extent, but for some reason I just randomly wanted to compare it to Courage the Cowardly Dog.
I
would see that show inspiring that show.
Yeah, and I think that there's an element of like it is kind of dark and spooky. And a lot of, I mean, the monsters are never monsters. They're always, just people trying to get away with stuff, which is like a really interesting element to have. But the whole thing is kind of overlaid with this comedy aspect. So I feel like they are similar in that way.
Yeah. Well, Scooby-Doo's in the middle between like lighter animation and darker animation. What's a lighter animation animated series that we can think of?
Well,
I'm drawing a blank myself.
Probably Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man animated series.
The one with him and Iceman and the Fire Girl, or is that?
Well, that too, I think. That was Spider-Man and his pals, but there's also
and his Amazing Friends,
Yeah, his Amazing Friends, that was it. Mm-hmm. But no, I think it was a different one, right? Like in 60s or 70s, that was Spider-Man. It's where the pointing meme comes from.
Oh, yeah, the first one, yeah.
That one.
That one. Yeah, that was light and goofy. Yeah.
So I think that was like 66. Again, it may have been 70s, but
between 60 and 66, probably.
67.
67. Okay. Yeah. So not between 60 and 66.
Yeah. Just barely.
But yeah, again, I would say that's probably a little lighter. Yeah. A lot of, I think, when handling nerd culture, a lot of the earlier things, and maybe just in general, a lot of the stuff that is popular and that I would consider classics, at least, maybe just a lot of us would consider classics, tend to lean more towards the darker side.
Yeah. I'm looking at thinking of fantasies. I don't think we talked about a lot of fantasy classics.
Like what?
Never-ending Story.
Oh,
that has the whole
Hunter
hero goes on a quest, and that's more a lighthearted version, it's for kids. It's for kids, even though adults can tear up.
It had it had some content in it that like. I remember almost like destroyed me as a kid.
Yeah. Right. A second one to that is like that one's I guess could be more aimed for kids, while Conan the Barbarian is more aimed for adults. Yeah. But that's definitely a fantasy classic.
So actually, thinking of it now, there are a few that I'm more aware of and have seen parts of them, but haven't seen the whole movies. Like Neverending Story. I don't think I ever saw it. If I did, I was really young and I don't remember any of it. Also, The Dark Crystal.
I was just thinking that.
I hear a lot about it. I've never seen it.
It's weird.
Yeah. Also, what's that one with Tom Cruise? I think it's Tom Cruise. One of his earlier things is like a fantasy thing.
I can't think of anything.
I don't know if you consider this fantasy, but I was going to say Jurassic Park.
That borders
probably.
on sci-fi.
It kind of like plays that line though. I feel like because
I mean,
sci-fi and
I definitely think it would. I definitely think it's more sci-fi than fantasy.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's dinosaurs, and it's using like technology to bring them back, and you have to outsmart the dinosaurs using technology, and But it's definitely a classic because it's done. It's shown, it kind of pushed what we could do with what we had, and it made Spielberg was really creative in like making that look as real as possible.
Yep.
And now there's a lot. Some directors don't do too much CGI, and some do and don't rely on animatronics, which can hurt the movie.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to ask, because it's not that old, so it's an interesting question. I want to know your guys' opinions about Lord of the Rings as classics.
No.
I mean, I feel
in my heart they are.
I feel like they should be, but I don't really want to consider them. I'm kind of with Josh. I don't really want to consider them classics.
I was actually joking, so I say no, it's not a classic. But now I think about it's a hard. If we're talking about movies and TV shows,
yeah, that's the thing.
It's because it's based off a book, which has been around a lot longer, and they just made the movies came out. They're not quite. They haven't hit that age quite yet,
Yeah, so I would definitely consider the books. If you were talking about the books, there'd be no question. They are definitely classics. The movies,
they're on their way.
Yeah, I don't know that I can really consider them classics.
In my heart, they're classics.
That's kind of in the same way where I want to consider The Watchmen a classic, but it just, and it may barely be old enough, but
we're talking about movies and TV shows.
Yeah. It's like the movie The Watchmen. I kind of feel like it should be a modern classic, but again, more so, I would consider the graphic novel a classic than the movie.
Yeah, if we are adding comics in there, Watchmen is a classic. But it's if we're talking about the movie, it could be on its way, but it's because it's a very graphic, very visual. It's a very good replicant of the comic.
Yeah. The other one that I had questions about was The Matrix. Again, I feel like I just grew up on it, so I want to say it's a classic, but I don't know if I really believe it.
Yeah,
on its
way. The first one, I would say. I mean, it's 20 years old.
Yeah,
it's 20 years old.
Again, but you shot down South Park for the reason it's not old enough anymore.
That's another good question. Another good. Well, I guess it ties into the whole South Park thing, which we keep coming back to. Does something have to be a certain age to be a classic?
Yeah. Oh, also, real quick, before I forget to mention this, the movie I was thinking of with Tom Cruise is Legend.
I haven't heard of Legend before.
I don't know if I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I haven't seen all of it. Again, from what I've seen, I like it, and it's good. It's bad, but it's good. It was 1985.
I just remembered Back to the Future.
Ridley Scott did it. Just remembered Back to the Future.
I know. It was not in my brain. I was like, wait, that's a thing that exists. That is totally on my list.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard to dispute.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a classic.
Yeah. All part of the time travel movies and kind of setting the stage and kind of the crazy doctor and bumbling sidekick.
You keep going to things that are referenced specifically in Rick and Morty.
Well,
wait, Hunter, Josh, you know Rick and Morty was inspired by Back to the Future.
I know, that's what I'm saying. You keep specifically referencing.
Anyway,
it was a template for that. You did the same thing with Doctor Who, except not as obviously.
I think Doctor Who might have influenced Back to the Future. I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking.
Oh no, well I'm saying Doctor Who also influenced Rick and Morty,
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, I would definitely say a lot bit.
Yeah.
Almost equal parts probably as Back to the Future did.
Yeah.
He even specifically references Doctor Who in that show. I'm
Yeah,
Doctor Who in this mother.
Rick definitely has more of a, feels. I guess he feels more like Doctor Who than he's not as humble as Doc Brown.
Definitely, and that's why one of the reasons I feel like it's definitely that's equal parts Doctor Who and Back to the Future.
Anyway, I definitely think that if we go back to sort of one of my beginning criteria of the references need to be sort of melded in with the culture, I definitely think Back to the Future is one where like we just say quotes without even realizing them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So it sounds like some things that we agree on or like could use further discussion are it should have some sort of historical impact in terms of media to be considered a classic or be the first of its kind or have inspired something else, right? We're debating like the age that it needs to be. It seems like 20 years is kind of where like our gray zone. Or like, is that classic?
For a modern classic.
For a modern
20
classic.
to 30 years seems.
Okay.
Yeah. But just we're saying, I think anything newer than that, we're like,
it's no, or it's on.
Not old enough yet. Yeah. Maybe in a few years. And then in terms of pop culture references, what do you guys think about needing them to be sort of like part of our culture at this point?
I don't know. It's to consider it a classic, not necessarily. Like I don't think that's
like Princess Bride. I think it might be a really good example. Like even people who haven't seen it quote it.
See, I don't know. Every time I think Princess Bride, I think of someone doing a very deliberate quote from that. I've never talked to anybody, at least personally, that has quoted it without knowing what they were quoting.
Yeah. Well, maybe they know what they're quoting, but they haven't like seen it, or at least haven't seen it the hundreds of times that I've seen it.
Wait, did we actually officially bring up The Princess Bride? Because
no, we didn't.
I meant to, and that's definitely a classic.
I would consider it a classic.
I told you I went to the Carrie Ellis panel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm jealous.
Yes, you should be.
So
Dragon Con next year. Buy your ticket now for like $90.
So it sounds like we've got some mildly concrete criteria, but I don't know if we have like a couple things we've agreed on that are classics. Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yeah.
We agreed are classics, and even if you want to put yourself in either camp, you probably should have at least seen both.
We agree.
Doctor Who, I think we've agreed.
Yeah, Doctor Who.
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future. Jurassic Park.
There's a lot of movies now I want to get to. Also, like, I also want to consider Alien because Alien seems like such a classic.
We've got a lot for sci-fi though, but as far as we said, animated classics like Scooby-Doo. I'm trying to think of some other ones.
Well, I think Princess Bride we can consider classic because it definitely falls into that fantasy category.
Yeah.
And definitely like was unique.
There's also we're also looking at classic animation. Looney Tunes is classic animation,
and
even though some of his earlier things are you want to look at it from a specific time in history because some of the older stuff is a little rough as far as like it's very flawed, but some of the modern stuff they fix it up a little bit.
Also, if you're going Looney Tunes, I would also say Disney. Like about anything Disney, so like Lion King especially is the first.
Well, Snow White is the first one.
Well, I mean, but Lion King was just on my mind because I love it.
Classic.
Well, that's unfortunately we're gonna have to end the conversation here. We're pretty much out of time. But if you're watching this, we can continue. And if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment telling us what you think your favorite classics are.
Nobody watches.
Do you agree with us or disagree? I mean, you someday. Any final words? No?
Final words.
No? From you guys? No? Okay.
No.
Well, then, this is Nerd Variety signing off. We will see you guys next